In the last class, we were discussing about M13 and phage based cloning vectors. M13 is a filamentous coliphage with a genome composed of single-stranded circular DNA. If we just look at the life cycle of the bacteriophage M13, the M13 or the P blue script, that is a phagemate, they infect E. coli harboring the male specific structure called the F. pilus. Now they enter the cell by adsorption to this structure, and once inside the phage DNA, they are converted to a double-stranded rfDNA, that is replicative form of DNA. Now the replication then proceeds rapidly until about 100 RF, that is replicative form DNA molecules are produced within the cell, that is E. coli. Now the DNA synthesis then switches to the production of single strands, and the DNA is assembled and packaged into the capsid at the bacterial periplasm. So the bacteriophage DNA is then encapsulated by the major coat protein labeled as gene 8 protein, of which there are approximately 2800 copies with 3 to 6 copies of the gene 3 protein at one end of the particle. So the extrusion of the bacteriophage through the bacterial periplasm results in a decreased growth rate of the cell, that is E. coli cell, rather than host cell lysis. And this is clearly visible on a lawn of bacteria as an area of clear zone. So about 100 to 1000 packaged phage particles may be released into the medium in one cell division. Right. If we just look at the cloning into single-stranded phage vectors, in addition to producing single-stranded DNA, the coliphage vectors have a number of other features that make them attractive as cloning vectors. These bacteriophage DNA is replicated as double-stranded replicative form DNA intermediate, that is rfDNA intermediate, and a number of regular DNA manipulations may be performed, which include but not limited to restriction digestion, mapping, and DNA ligation. Okay. So thus the bacteriophage can act as a plasmid under certain circumstances, and at other times it can produce DNA in the fashion of a virus. So there are several vectors, a family of vectors derived from M13 are being currently used, such as M13 MP8/9, 18/9, etc. So all of which have a number of highly useful features. All of these contain a synthetic MCS, multiple cloning site, which is located in the LAC-Z gene. You can carefully go through the figure and you can understand where exactly the MCS polylinker is present. The MCS, which is located in the LAC-Z gene without disruption of the reading frame of the gene. So this allows efficient selection to be undertaken based on the technique, that is what we discussed earlier, the blue-white screening selection. So this feature makes the vector more useful for the reason that greater choice of restriction enzymes could be used. But there is a problem. One problem which is frequently encountered with M13 is the instability and spontaneous loss of inserts that are greater than 6 kilo base pairs. Right? Then moving on to the phage they are very much similar to M13 and replicate in a similar fashion. And one of the first ever phage vector developed is the PEMBL, which is shown in the figure. So this was constructed by inserting a fragment of another phage that is termed F1, which contain a phage origin of replication and elements for its morphogenesis into a PUC8 plasmid. Following superinfection with helper phage, the F1 origin is activated and this allows single-stranded DNA to be produced. Now the phage is assembled into a phage coat, extruded through the periplasm and secreted into the culture medium in a similar way to that of M13. So you can find a lot of similarities between the phage and M13. So without superinfection, the phage replicates as a PUC type plasmid, and in the replicative form, that is RF, the DNA isolated is double stranded. So this allows further manipulation such as restriction, digestion, ligation and mapping analysis can be performed. So a typical example of phage is the P blue script vector, and this can be used in its own right as a cloning vector and manipulated as if it was supposed to be a plasmid. Similar to M13, this phage can be used in nucleotide sequencing as well as in site-directed mutagenesis. And second advantage is it is also possible to produce RNA transcripts which down the lane can be used in the production of labeled cRNA probes, or we term it as riboprobes. Okay. Next we will discuss about the cosmid based cloning vectors. The upper limit of the insert capacity of a bacteriophage, that is specifically the lambda bacteriophage, is approximately 21 kilo base pairs. And this is because of the requirement for essential genes and the fact that the maximum length between the two cos sites, we saw it in the previous session, the length between the two cos sites is about 52 kilo base pairs. So the maximum insert capacity is about 21 kilo base pairs. So consequently, cosmid vectors have been constructed which incorporate the cos sites from bacteriophage, that is lambda bacteriophage, and also the essential features of a plasmid. What are the essential features from a plasmid? That is plasmid having the origin of replication, a gene for drug resistance, and several unique restriction sites for insertion of the DNA or the fragment of DNA to be cloned. Right? So as seen in the figure, when a cosmid preparation is linearized by the use of restriction digestion and then ligated to DNA for cloning, the products will include concatamers of alternating cosmid vector and insert. So the only requirement for a length of DNA to be packaged into viral head is that it should contain cos sites spaced the correct distance apart. That is, in practice, this spacing is about, or it can range anywhere between 37 to 52 kilobase pair. So such DNA can be packaged in vitro if bacteriophage head precursors, tail and packaging proteins are provided. Right. So the spacing range is between 37 to 52 kilobase pair, and for in vitro packaging there should be bacteriophage head precursor, tail and packaging proteins. Since the cosmid is very small, inserts of about 40 kilobase pair in length will be most readily packaged. So you can stretch up to 40 kilobase pairs. So what happens once inside the cell? The DNA recircularizes through its cos sites, and then from then onwards it behaves exactly like a plasmid. So after recircularization, the behavior is very much similar to a plasmid. Now cosmids are especially useful for the analysis of highly complex genomes and are an important part of various genome mapping projects. Right? Next, we have large insert capacity vectors. That is, large insert capacity cloning vectors. Vectors which accept larger fragments of DNA than the capacity of lambda phage or cosmids, more than what the lambda phage or cosmids can accommodate. So vectors which accept larger fragments of DNA in comparison to the lambda phage or the cosmids, they have the distinct advantage that fewer clones need to be screened when searching for the foreign DNA of interest. So this is the most important advantage when compared to screening with respect to large insert capacity cloning vectors are lambda phage and cosmids. And in addition, they have an enormous impact in the mapping of the genomes of organisms and are extensively used in the genome mapping project, especially the human genome mapping project. And the recent developments have given rise to the production of large insert capacity vectors, and you find across the bacterial artificial chromosomes, mammalian artificial chromosomes, and among the large insert capacity cloning vectors, perhaps the most significant is the development of vectors which are based on yeast artificial chromosomes or YACs. Right? So if you just carefully look at the figure, the yeast artificial chromosomes, they are linear molecules and they are composed of centromere, telomere and a replication origin which is termed as ARS element. ARS refer to autonomous replicating sequence. Right? So an yeast artificial chromosome, which is a linear molecule, is composed of a centromere, a telomere and a replication origin which is termed as ARS element, that is, or it refers to autonomous replicating sequence. Now this yeast artificial chromosome is digested with restriction enzyme at a specific site, that is suppressor tRNA gene marker site, abbreviated as SUP4 site. So you can observe that site in the figure. So these yeast artificial chromosome vectors is digested with restriction enzyme at this particular SUP4 site, which is referred to as a suppressor tRNA gene marker site, and BAMH1 sites. So this separates the telomere sequences. Now this produces two arms, and the foreign genomic DNA is then ligated to produce a functional yeast artificial chromosome construct. Right. Now these yeast artificial chromosome constructs are replicated in yeast cells. However, the external cell wall of the yeast that needs to be removed to leave the spiroblast, and they are osmotically unstable and need to be embedded in a solid matrix, for example agar. So once the yeast cells are transformed, only the correctly constructed yeast artificial chromosome cloning vectors with associated selectable markers are replicated in the yeast strains. Now the DNA fragments with repeated sequences, which are sometimes very difficult to clone in the other vectors, that is bacterially or the plasmids, may also be cloned in or using yeast artificial cloning vectors. So the main advantage of these yeast artificial cloning vector or YAC based vectors is the ability to clone very large fragments of DNA. That is a distinctive advantage over other cloning vectors. And the stable maintenance and replication of foreign DNA fragments up to 2000 kilobase pairs have been carried out using the yeast artificial chromosome cloning vector. And because of this reason, they are the main vector of choice in the various genome mapping and sequencing projects. Right? Next, we will try to understand an important concept, that is labeling of the probes. So with respect to the curriculum, we have discussed about cloning vectors, especially the plasmids, phagmids, cosmids, and the yeast cloning vectors. Now we will try to understand how the probes, gene probes or DNA probes, are labeled. That means the different approaches for labeling the nucleic acids and probes. The availability of custom oligonucleotide synthesis and the PCR, they have contributed very significantly, or we can say greatly, to the rapid production of these gene probes. And nowadays the availability of a gene probe is very much essential in almost all molecular biology experiments, and yet in many cases its production is one of the most difficult. The steps which are involved in production of these nucleic acid probes or the gene probes, the steps are very much difficult. So there is no single approach, and there are different methods by which a probe is labeled. The information that is needed to produce a gene probe may come from many sources. Mostly we depend on the databases. There are a number of genetic databases across the world, and it is possible for an individual to search over the internet and identify a particular sequence that is more related to a specific gene or could be for a specific protein. And in some cases it is possible to use related proteins too from the same gene family just to gain information on the most useful DNA sequence. Right. So similar sequences, that is similar proteins or DNA sequences but from different species, may also provide a source or a starting point with which to produce the so-called heterologous gene probe. So there are several sources. You can search the genetic basis and you can arrive at identifying particular sequences related to a specific gene or protein, or it is possible to use related proteins from the same gene family or similar proteins or DNA sequences but from different species. All these provide a starting point with which we produce the so-called gene probes. Right? So an essential feature of a gene probe is that it can be visualized by some means. You develop some means, so the ultimate objective is to, or the essential feature is to visualize the gene probe. So in this way, a gene probe that hybridizes to a complementary sequence may be detected and the desired sequence may be identified from a complex mixture. And there are two main ways of labeling the gene probes. A traditional approach, that is by use of radioactive labels. But nowadays, the use of non-radioactive label is gaining popularity. If you try to understand the radioactive or use of radioactive labels, perhaps the most used radioactive label is the P32, and we can also see the use of S35 and tritium. So these labels may be detected by a process which is commonly called as autoradiography, where the labeled probe molecule bound to the target DNA or the sample DNA located, so for example on a nylon membrane, and which is placed in contact with an X-ray sensitive film. So what happens following the exposure, the film is developed and then it is fixed as a black and white negative which reveals the precise location of the label probe and therefore the DNA to which it has been hybridized. Right. So in this table you can see a comparison of different labeling strategies. We have 5' end labeling, 3' end labeling, Nick translation, random hexamer, PCR and ribo probes. And in the last column, if you just carefully observe, it is about the specific activity. So the 5' end labeling has low specific activity, 3' end labeling has low specific activity, whereas Nick translation, random hexamer, PCR riboprobes, they are all having high specific activity. And with respect to probe type, except riboprobes, all other labeling methods are for the DNA, right? Now, if you move on to non-radioactive DNA labeling, nowadays there is an increase, or these non-radioactive labels are increasingly being used to label the DNA probes or the gene probes. No doubt, radioactive labels, they are more sensitive than the non-radioactive labels, but with several R&D or the research with respect to non-radioactive counterparts, even sensitivity compared to radioactive labels have been achieved. So this has led to their greater acceptance. Now you can have better sensitivity in comparison to radioactive probes. So that's the reason why non-radioactive labeling methods are gaining a lot of significance. And the labeling system are termed either direct labeling or direct detection, or indirect labeling or indirect detection. Now, in direct labeling, it allows an enzyme reporter such as the alkaline phosphatase to be coupled directly to the DNA. And although this may alter the characteristics of the DNA probe, it offers the advantage of rapid analysis since there is no intermediate steps in the labeling process. In indirect labeling, which is a more popular in the current or the present days, this technique relies on the incorporation of a nucleotide which has a label attached to it, and at present there are three most used labels. In the figure you can see the biotin, deoxygenin, and the third one, the fluorescein. So these molecules are covalently linked to the nucleotides using a spacer, which is a carbon spacer arm, which is about 7 or 14 or even 21 atom, and specific binding proteins are used as a bridge between the nucleotide and a reporter protein. The reporter protein is an enzyme. For example, biotin incorporated into a DNA fragment is recognized with a very high affinity by the protein streptavidin. So this may be either coupled or conjugated to a reporter protein or the enzyme molecule such as alkaline phosphatase or HRP, that is horseradish peroxidase. So this is usually used to convert a colorless substrate into a colored insoluble compound, and it also offers a means of signal amplification, right? And alternative methods to detect the labels such as deoxygenin incorporated into DNA sequences may be by the use of the MABs, that is monoclonal antibodies, right? So with this, I'll stop my discussion for today's session. We will continue to discuss about the gene probe labeling in the next session. Thank you very much.